But there's also, I mean, one of my favorite techniques is washing plants, you know, just with any pests in general. I think plants like to be washed. I think they appreciate it. And I think it could be incredibly helpful. So yeah, live births, they do overwinter a lot of the time on, aphids will overwinter on, you know, different things in the prunus genus, like cherries or plums or nectarines or any of those like pitted fruits. And we have so many orchards in Southern Oregon that it always concerns me that there's a lot of overwintering happening for pests in general, aphids specifically with the orchards, but you know, there's a lot of other, the broad mites and russet mites definitely overwinter in the stems of plants. So that's something to, you know, consider around your property as well.
Eviane, I had a quick question. It's my understanding that aphids are oftentimes farmed by ants.
Oh.
Would it also be prudent to address any rogue ant populations near or in your garden?
100% yes. And there's some great solutions for large scale. Some of the insectaries will carry products that are natural products that you can buy in bulk that you can use to kind of eradicate ants. But I've seen ants, and somewhere also, I was wishing I could add more photos. It's such a hard time of year for me to work on presentations, just because literally it's, you know, sun up till sundown with the farming right now. But 100%, I have some great photos of aphids being farmed by ants, and it's scary because when you know that if you see that, you know you really have a problem also, because you're not going to be able to, it's harder to knock down the aphids if you can't see them, you know, if they've been removed out of the equation a little bit and they're out of your touch. That's why it's really important to, when you're doing your site evaluations and your assessments, to check the surrounding areas, especially if you have greenhouses. You know, checking around is very, very important. Not just looking at, you know, not just looking at your cannabis, but looking at like, where could it be coming in from, you know, have the humans vectored it in, you know, are you cleaning your shoes? Are you going into a propagation area after you've been out in the field? You know, how we as humans move pests around is also really important. But
Are you brushing up against any plants on your way into the garden area from outside?
Even if it's like ryegrass in the parking lot, you know, root aphids or different things. That's why it's important to know, you know, what are you doing as a vector? You know, have you been to another farm? You know, I always ask people, I'm like, have you been at another farm today? And luckily, you know, we're really lucky. I think a lot of the ODA testers and the labs in Oregon have really been awesome about, you know, like they'll suit up entirely if you ask them, you know, especially if they've been at 3 other farms before they've come to your farm. I have some really adorable pictures of some of my tester friends that they're fully suited up, and you know, they care. And if your tester doesn't care enough to like wear booties or do whatever, you know, suit up when they're coming in and they've been at other farms, then, you know, you can ask them, 100% ask them to, you know, ask them where they've been that day. So yeah, I would take care of your ants for sure.
Yeah, that was a huge one right in the beginning, Eviane. When we first were engaging the OLCC and discussing with them what their protocols were going to be when it came to visiting our farms, made it abundantly clear that I considered them to be a vector for contamination, and if they didn't have, at minimum, shoe coverings or a different pair of shoes, that they weren't going to be allowed on the farm. They need to have a disposal box in the back of the truck to put their shoe coverings on when they go from farm to farm. Don't wear them into the vehicle, and then take them off. You take them off and then you get into the vehicle, because there are a number of soil-borne pathogens that are invisible to our naked eye that they could also be transmitting.
Absolutely. I feel like, you know, I really appreciate your regulatory work and what you've done to help inform, because I think a lot of regulations you know, they're not thinking from an agricultural perspective, and you know, they don't have that historic, you know, they don't understand the importance. So I think that I really appreciate what you've done, by going in and helping to be, you know, informing. It's really important that people get that piece. So I really appreciate your work there.
So would you like to take a minute to address acidity and alkalinity, both in soil and water, as something that can compromise plant health and allow it to be easier for pests to take hold?
Ooh, yeah, you like the tough questions. Yes.
Well, I'll tell you the reason I bring this up. I'll preface it a little bit. So we have our classifications internally with the industry for high THC, high CBD, balanced, and hemp cultivars is based on different chemical compositions. We also have at least something that we've built internally as Omnibudsman Enterprises, and this has been introduced as a concept in several states now. The delineation in hemp between type A, which is for novel cannabinoid production, and type B, which is a true fiber crop. To that end, we're working in locations that have vastly different water inputs. And okay, so swallow before I say this next thing here, because I don't want you to spit your drink on your computer. I went out to a farm this week, and they were having some nutrient uptake problems. And I immediately tested their water, and the water coming out of the river that they're using to irrigate was pH 10.0. See, that's why I wanted you to swallow your drink first, because I knew you would spit it out.
What did their poor plants look like?
They looked like they needed an acid wash, and that's exactly what they gave them. They responded very positively within 24 hours to a heavy foliar feeding. And to that end, we drenched the plants, but we drenched them from the underside up because the stoma on the bottoms of the leaves were absorbing the acidic water. And as your picture that's on the screen illustrates, whether it's aphids or two-spotted russet mites or a number of our other common pests, they hide on the underside of the leaves. Soaking the plant from the top down is not effective. You have to soak it from the bottom up. But that high pH water was definitely affecting nutrient uptake and making it easier for pests to colonize.
So really interesting, because it's one of the first things you're going to check, right? You know, you're going to check the pH of your water to make sure that your plants are, you know, uptaking things properly. And it affects so many different things. And then also, it also very much affects a lot of the different applications that are used. You 100% need to check to make sure that the pH is correct to match the label of what you're doing. But just for watering needs in general, I feel like, you know, it's kind of like growing 101, like you're going to check your pH, right? So making sure that you're in that ideal range is really, really important. That's so surprising to me that seems out of hand. I mean, like I see 8.8 and I'm like starting to freak out, you know? So that's important to me to look at for sure.
Well,
there's a lot
especially coming right out of the river. I mean, if it's coming right out of the river, whoo!
Yeah,
there's an environmental problem for you.
So, you know, we're shooting for an ideal pH of around 5.8 to 6.0 on the water source. So what we did is we took high nitrogen, a 5.500 organic fertilizer, and we mixed that with the water to knock the pH down to 5.5 to compensate for the existing deficiency. And then we foliar fed. And then at the same time, we sprayed with a mineral oil solution that's labeled as dormant spray, but it's also listed on the label appropriately as being suitable for two-spotted mites, which would thrive in those alkaline conditions.
Yeah, I'm curious which one specifically, but I get that you probably don't want to say. But I think it's fascinating too, because so here's a strange thing. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but there's these theories that the high alkaline water like or low or high, can actually help with pest problems. Have you heard this theory? So actually spraying the plants with like 11.2 or something like that will help to work to knock down things like aphids. We've been wanting to do our own little experiment with this at some point. I have talked to a couple people that have experimented, and some people have had luck with it, but you have to go back and wash the plant again with like a two basically. Like I think it's 2 to 3, so you have to balance it. I would like to see, but apparently it can be like, there's theories it could work as a knockdown for a serious pest problem. So I've been very curious because, I mean, imagine if that was possible. I would love to see some research on if it's possible to, you know, use water. What if we could use water pH'd in different ways to actually treat pest problems? I think that's kind of a fascinating concept, so it's worth investigating. But there's definitely people out there that swear that this can be a thing.
Yeah, I know two. That's like, that's almost hydrochloric acid is what that's almost.
Yeah.
If you're that acidic, that's crazy. I mean, in 11, I mean that's like almost pure baking soda. That's just crazy. I don't know. I'd have to have a plant set aside. Just here, let's just try this. We're just gonna pour some just great super base on it and then spray it with some acid. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. That sounds a little sketchy to me.
I definitely plants I didn't really care that much.
There needs to be a control group.
Right.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
We always do, and just for the record, when we do tests of different applications of things that we're going to try and use, the best idea is to have your control. So thanks for bringing that up, Dale, because it's very important to have. Usually we'll try a couple different things at once, and then the control is usually water. It's just like spraying the plant with water. You know,
Sure.
what happens on that side of things. And it's interesting. I like doing this. I love side-by-sides. I mean, I wish that there was more side-by-sides with cannabis and that we could start to get more and more research. I want to just circle back really quickly to Dale, what you had said about the ants, because also one of my understanding is when there are ants generally within a system, it means that the system is out of balance. And that is something that has always strikes me. Like if I'm farming and I see that there's a lot of ant activity, it's showing me that there's something off in the balance of what I'm doing. So it's just one of those key things, you know, kind of like frogs are an indicator of whether your ecosystem is healthy or not. You know, you're getting a lot of frogs on your farm and your garden, it means that, you know, your ecosystem is really healthy and thriving. No frogs at all anywhere, it's something that you know, maybe want to take note of. But I always
Well, cool. So you mean the 3 frogs I got living in my kitchen say that my house is all in balance?
I'm gonna go with yes. When I find frogs in my like garden roots, I'm like, I'm doing something right.
Yeah, I got them everywhere. It's crazy. Like I view them like, I think of it like I used to when I traveled down in the South America and the Central America. You stay anywhere you stay, there's always geckos on the wall. You know, that's kind of how I view my little frogs because they're everywhere. It's crazy.
Right. I believe it's pronounced feng shui, not frog's way.
So we're just over an hour now. So let's why don't we wrap it up and move on a little bit and kind of move towards the end there, Eviane, and we'll kind of wrap this meeting up here in a little bit.
Well, I so appreciate you guys having me, you know, just in for a fun conversation, and I really enjoy geeking out with you guys anytime, you know, about the plant science and different pieces. And I think it's so important that we, you know, just to kind of summarize that, that we work together and that we utilize the resources that we have and that we leverage our experience as a collective and what we can do to kind of help make sure that we keep our plants healthy. You know, we're keeping our crops healthy because that's where the revenue stream comes in. So if we're cannabinoid farmers, then, you know, we're growing these high terpene plants. And the terpenes also, you know, I'm pretty fascinated. I did want to kind of circle into that a little bit of, you know, cannabis is such an amazing plant because it has these natural pest defense mechanisms. So innately, it already has, it's proactive on its own, you know, and so if we're breeding cultivars that have these high pesticide resistance, you know, there's some breeders out there I really appreciate because, you know, they've focused on certain terpenes that really prevent aphids and other things from affecting the plant. And I just think that's so genius. And if we can, you know, start to hone in on that, I've noticed that some of the most resistant cultivars and that I've grown also are the strongest terpene profiles, and like they're just almost waxy. They're so, you never see a pest on those plants ever, you know. So it's interesting for us to observe. And then we're also doing a lot of this unusual breeding with hemp over the past few years, you know, and a lot of the CBG plants I've also noticed they don't have as vigorous terpene profiles. So I'm hoping that starts to come in with some of these CBG cultivars, and, you know, we're working on it and other people are working on it as well. But, you know, I just think it's important to remember that cannabis is innately a very smart plant. And I feel like she already has a lot of she has the tech. You know, if we just kind of watch what she's doing, then I think that we'll be in a good way. So.
So I also want to give a tip of the hat here to our good friends, the ladybugs, who munch on aphids like a buffet. And I want to give a little anecdote. A friend of mine a couple of years ago was really proud of what he was doing with his garden. He said he had the most beautiful yellow ladybugs all over his plants, and he didn't know where they came from, but I went, whoa, 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 whoa. Those are squash beetles. Those are eating your plants, not eating the bugs. We're going to need to address this. He was, I mean, just beside himself. But yeah, ladybugs are not yellow, they're red.
Well,
and I'd like to touch on that a second about the use of ladybugs. I have tried to move away from the use of ladybugs and have moved to green lacewing larvae for aphid control, because from what I understand, ladybug collection is not really done sustainably. They do it in the wild. They don't farm ladybugs. They actually go down to a place in Shasta and collect them out of the wild, and it's not really sustainably done. It's actually, from what I understand, is causing a pretty severe hit to the ladybug population there in Shasta. So the green lacewing larvae, they like to munch on the aphids as well, but they are farmed, so they're a little more sustainably produced, I believe.
I agree.
There's a lot
I would like to,
with the ladybugs right now. I will add that when I consider biocontrols that are, you know, in addition and part of your controls in IPM, I don't actually consider ladybugs as something that you necessarily want to introduce. There's a lot. I mean, it's a deep conversation. But essentially, you know, not releasing ladybugs is, I mean, they're very, very wonderful, but if they come on their own, that's great. You know, if they're coming already, but it's not something I would use either. I mean, and it's also one of those pieces of not all biocontrols are going to work fantastic for your needs. And, you know, there's even right now, like hoverfly larvae. We saw tons of hoverflies last year and tons of hoverfly larvae in Southern Oregon and Northern California. And the interesting thing about the larvae is they eat the aphids, and they're fantastic at eating the aphids, but they overwinter on the cannabis buds. And the last thing people want to see is little larvae in their buds, but it was like an epidemic. I mean, they're everywhere. I've talked to so many farmers. So it's one of those interesting things where it's like, I don't know if I would necessarily want to introduce those also, but you know, if they're here naturally, I'm cool with them. But it's just learning the ID and learning what what works and maybe what's not the most sustainable method. So yeah, ladybugs, I love them. I love to see them on cannabis, especially out in the hemp fields when they're just coming in. But I think releasing them in the greenhouse, you know, I know a lot of people still do, and I'm not a fan, so.
And to Rob's point about the lacewings, even though both the insects fly, lacewings are less migratory. Ladybugs are not as stable of a population. They're more inclined to move both after hatching and in pursuit of a food source. So the lacewings may be a better solution overall, in part because they're more likely to stay put until they run out of food.
Absolutely. I think lacewings are one of my favorite solutions. I think they work really well. We've seen, and that's kind of where like the observation of like what actually works when you're evaluating your program, you know, it's like lacewings are working well, you know, ladybugs might not be the best solution.
Okay. Well, let's if that's unless you have something else, let's kind of wrap up this little section of the meeting, and then I'd like to have Pete come on and give us just a little bit of legislative update about what he's seeing as far as you know, the legalization across the nation, any changes here in Oregon that we might be seeing. So Eviane, I'm going to give you just a chance here to kind of wrap up, and anything else you want to say before I turn you off? No, I'm just kidding. I won't turn you off.
There is no off button, Rob.
There's no off button. This is exactly.
There's no off button. We're farming. It's happening.
Right.
Well, I really appreciate all of you. I appreciate the Sungrowers Guild, and I feel like you guys are a great resource for this area, and I feel honored to be asked to come and share any information, and very, very happy to, you know, geek out on IPM anytime with anybody. I love, you know, just in general, the whole cannabis, the situation right now with cannabis just feels really, it feels like it's kind of the light right now. And it has been the past few months. You know, I feel really blessed that we get to work and something that is finally, you know, we're having this historic moment of being considered essential after so long. And, you know, there's a lot to be said just about how, you know, on the backs of giants, and also, you know, just as far as, you know, the prohibition era, and that there are still people in jail for, you know, now we're getting to operate in this legal landscape, and, you know, just the care of the plant and the care of what we do and the care of our community. This is an exciting time. And so you know, I really appreciate being able to work in this industry, and appreciate you guys. And yeah, I'm happy. I have my botanical strategies, my consulting. I'm happy to talk to people anytime, and, you know, can offer more in-depth perspective.
Do you have some? Do you have a way to put a little contact information up on the screen so that if somebody wants to get a hold of you, they can do that?
Sure. I mean, Farm is really the best way, or Cascade Hemp Collective. You know, I'm pretty findable. This presentation, I don't think I actually have that put into the presentation, but definitely I'm findable. I'll pull it up. I'll just give you a second, and I'll find it for you guys. Okay.
So go. Yeah. While you're doing that, hey Pete, why don't you come back on and talk to us a little bit about, I guess what I'd like you to do for starters right now is dispel the rumor that has been going around, at least out here in the Applegate, that the entire country is going legal this November.
Yeah, that would be great. It's not
happening. I get it. But I can't tell you how many times somebody down at the cafe, or, you know, at the hardware stores, come up to me and goes, "Rob, did you hear? The whole country's going to go legal in November." I'm like, yeah, I don't think so.
No, unfortunately, I don't think so. We waited through 8 years of the previous administration for federal legalization. That didn't happen. We've waited for over 3 years of this administration. It doesn't look like it's going to happen before the November 3rd general election. There are states that are making a little bit more progress now. South Dakota finally acknowledged the federal government's authority to regulate hemp. So shipping hemp through South Dakota is no longer a criminal offense in the eyes of the state. They have applied to join the USDA regulations under the 2018 Farm Bill, but you may not ship hemp to South Dakota at this point in time. Idaho is also in the same position. Idaho's governor had his Agriculture Department and Justice Department co-author a 7-page memorandum recently acknowledging the legality of hemp shipments, both seeds and finished products, flower products, through the state of Idaho. But again, you may not ship them to the state of Idaho. We still have several states that are very retrograde when it comes to the topic of smokable hemp. So for our hemp farming community in Oregon, you may be able to send flowers to certain states, but you can't send them to Idaho, you can't send them to South Dakota, you can't send them to Pennsylvania, you can't send them to North Carolina. Some states' regulations do not acknowledge anything that has to do with the big lighter. You cannot do smokable flower in all these states. I've heard people say that hemp is 50 state legal, and that is not the case, and they will find out and they will pursue you and they will charge you the same way they're charging marijuana. We just had recently in California, we had a 1.4 million plant bust. It was hot hemp, and they charged them with possession of marijuana, not with possession of hemp. So the regulators are still very hostile towards this. The DEA doesn't recognize the difference between type A hemp for novel cannabinoid production and type B hemp as a true fiber crop. That's going to be an ongoing discussion in this October's rulemaking period, and it's going to continue into 2021. If you're an Oregon hemp farmer, you need to get the rest of your 2019 harvest sold by October 30th, because that's when the rules change in Oregon. Any hemp harvested right now is under the new federal guidelines for 0.3% total THC. Anything that was harvested in 2019 has to be distributed before October 30th of this year, or it will be regarded as marijuana. On the bright side, with our programs, an individual growing for themselves can still have 12 pounds per plant at home. You're only allowed to have 1.5 pounds in public. Of course, as an individual who's not a medical card holder, you can have 8 ounces at home and up to 1 ounce on your person in public, and you can't be charged with an offense for that. So that's a good thing. One of the downsides right now, the DMV is, as of a week ago Friday, 100,000 appointments behind for driver's licenses, physicals, and out-of-state vehicle registrations. They won't be caught up until at least October. At the rate they're currently moving, it's going to be closer to March. And I bring that up because in the state of Oregon, expired driver's licenses are currently being acknowledged at least until October. We expect them to push that deadline out twice up into the spring of 2021. The OHA, despite our entreaties, has not acknowledged the status of medical cards that expired while the state was shut down. To that end, and I know the company is a little bit controversial, but Empower is now holding clinics in Grants Pass at the Grange on Fridays, and you can do a remote visit with the doctor over the computer, similarly to what we're doing here. I was the first person to pilot that program a couple of weeks ago because my medical card expired. So we got them hooked up at the Grange, got the doctor on the line in Portland. You do your interview with the doctor, bring in your identification, clinic fee. A few minutes after the interview with the doctor is done, he completes the paperwork. They send it down in an electronic file. They print out the physical copy, and then you can send it in. This is actually a kind of a big deal because last year at this time, they still wouldn't allow us to do remote appointments. And we've been asking them for 5 years to allow remote visits because some people, it's just an undue burden to make another visit to the doctor solely to have their medical card renewed. Now we're able to do those online visits. That's the only concession the health authority has made to date. And there's no expiration date on that program now. If we can prove that this works, we'll be able to do remote doctor visits continuing in the future, even after this health crisis is mitigated. So that's a good thing there. Unfortunately, since they're not acknowledging expired cards, if you're in the position where your card is expired, set up an appointment. Certain clinics like Southern Oregon Patients Awareness Center are doing limited doctor visits in person right now, but currently the only remote service that's available in Southern Oregon is Empower's clinics through Grants Pass and the Redwood Grange there. What else is on this list? Cannabis businesses are considered essential businesses, so that means dispensary employees, delivery drivers, the people that work on farms that own and manage OLCC licenses, the people that transport for them to the OLCC stores, they're not able to be restricted in their travel. So to that end, Oregon just posted a record $100 million. So it's kind of funny because at the same time Oregon just posted this record $100 million in revenue, there's an article that comes out that says Oregon is lagging behind other states in the retail market. And this is where we use the expression that figures don't lie, but liars figure. So if you're going to compare Oregon to Colorado, for example, with a much higher population and a much higher median income,
in a much lower cultivation rate, personal cultivation rate. I mean, probably a lot of the reasons why we're seeing those low numbers is that everybody can grow 4 of their own plants, so their visits to the dispensary may not be as often as someplace like in Colorado or Eastern Washington or someplace like that, where having your own plants just either is not legal or is not really feasible. One of the things that I like to say, at least here in Southern Oregon, is that if you're paying for marijuana, you just don't know anybody.
Yeah, that's true. And in Washington, Governor Inslee is also being pressured due to the fact that in Oregon, any adult with a couple of qualifications can grow their own 4 plants. Washington may very well follow suit with that in 2021. We do expect a minimum of 4 more states to legalize either medical or adult use or both this fall. And we expect the entire country to fall in line with the federal guidelines by the 1st of November. That's for hemp cultivation. The DEA is still kicking and screaming about the hemp regulations, but we don't have any state attorneys at this point in time that are actively pursuing marijuana cases. It is, though, as Eviane mentioned, it's beyond obscene that we still have people locked up for a plant that is now legal to transact in business in 36 states. Let's see. Salem, the report from the Capitol is, yes, it is in fact a mess. I was up there about 3 weeks ago. So the first night of protests in Portland was a Friday. The next night, Saturday, was the first night of protests in Salem. By 11 o'clock, that had gotten out of hand. Vandals spray painted the statuary on either side of the Capitol steps on the north side of the building near the Memorial Mall. They declared curfew. I went down because that's a few blocks from my office to see what was going on. And I got there right before the tear gas came out. They dispersed that group pretty quickly, but there was quite a bit of vandalism that night. It didn't get any better on Sunday. By Monday, it had migrated to daytime protests. The portion of downtown that was just opening up was completely shut down. It was really unfortunate to watch. There's a good way to make a point, and then there's, vandalizing other people's property and basically destroying the businesses that were just finally reopening after having been closed for over 10 weeks. This is actually continuing to this day in several cities. In Portland, there's unfortunately one of the OLCC businesses in Eugene that was broken into and vandalized during the protest, where it's a minority-owned business. There are only a handful of OLCC retailers that are owned by people of color, and they basically trashed one of those OLCC retailers in Eugene.
Yeah,
It's bizarre and it's disgusting.
Pete, I wanted to
And that's,
add real quick that our wholesaler operates in Portland, and we've been getting kind of on the ground updates for the past month from them, and 17 dispensaries were vandalized, looted, just really, really, really tore up in Portland and the Salem area. So it was that's a high number. It was pretty sad to hear, and just the impact after COVID and being considered essential. And it's like most of the dispensaries, if you know how they operate, it's like everything's in a safe. Like there's not really anything to loot. It's just essentially doing damage. I think very little was actually stolen, but all I could really think was like metric nightmare. Just terrible. And also, like, from anybody who works in the recreational business, just my heart goes out to all of those.
They were having a very similar problem in Seattle. There were reports that many of the dispensary owners had hired armed security guards to stand out front of their dispensaries to protect their businesses. Guys standing out. Guys, the one individual that I talked to said that when they went to the dispensary, they had to literally walk through this gauntlet of armed guards carrying AR-15s. That's just so disturbing.
Yeah, that doesn't have any business in our industry, and I'm also going to file this under poor planning for people that are breaking into dispensaries. The long arm of the law may not reach out and grab them tonight or tomorrow, but there are an average of 24 cameras in each of those facilities.
Right.
Mask or no mask, you're likely to get caught. It is just a matter of time. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't believe that those people are part of our community, and I don't believe they represent our community either.
I agree. Okay, well,
I mean, that is the state of affairs, but at the same time, when it comes to quarantine and lockdown, because we're considered an essential business, I still transit between my home in Southern Oregon and our office in Salem, and I am on currently a 2-week trip to North Dakota and Minnesota working with the hemp industry and with legislators over here. We're bringing the sun-grown standard to the Great North, and we're bringing our knowledge and expertise into an area that's more interested in the type B cultivation, but at the same time, we also have the privilege of working with the only state recognized CBD processor in North Dakota right now. So it's a very interesting, brave new world. When you hear things like that, it's easy to understand why people would think that federal legalization is going to happen in 2020, but in fact it won't. As ironic as this may sound, and I know this is going to frustrate some people, but President Trump is a lame duck second-term president, may actually be our best shot at federal legalization in our lifetime.
That's a little sad. I won't even get into that.
As a lame duck, there's no ramifications for it. We hoped that Obama would have legalized in his second term. Why he chose not to is beyond me, but we have a ripple effect going across the country right now. Like I said, we're expecting at least 4 more states to legalize medically or recreationally this fall. The rest of the holdout states on federal hemp regulations have gotten in line We have Indian tribes that are signing up that are distributing hemp products, that are growing hemp products. We have interstate commerce in hemp, and we have an ongoing petition with the Western states to allow the distribution of at least medical, if not adult use marijuana between the several states. Since I got to fly recently, and the TSA's official policy is that if you're carrying a personal use quantity that is legal in the state that you're flying from, they're not going to take your personal use cannabis. If the state you're flying to has an objection, that could be another story. But even though there's no official reciprocity for medical cards or for adult use laws, personal use quantities are no longer a reason to get yanked off the flight or locked up. The TSA has taken a hands-off stance. It's actually officially published on their website. They will not interfere.
That's good to hear, but let's not forget the fact that if you do decide that you want to smoke on the flight, well then you probably will get kicked off for that.
At this point in time, masks are required.
Yeah, right. Bring your cookies with you.
Masks are required in all national airports and on all airlines at this point in time, but there is no rule that says that you can't bring a couple of gummy bears and munch out.
Sure. So, Pete, before we close up, can you give us your thoughts or your observations on sort of our local, our local counties, Josephine, Jackson County, as far as, we know that Josephine County got almost $1 million grant for their sheriff's department and their enforcement efforts there in Josephine County. Jackson County is, still trying to look and keep the legal diversion to a minimum. So do you have any observations or have you seen anything about that?
So has taken in as of now about $1.3 million in state tax revenue, direct funding, and an additional set of grants for their participation in the Oregon, Idaho high intensity drug trafficking area. Jackson County has been part of this Oregon, Idaho high intensity drug trafficking task force for several years. Josephine was accepted to it in 2019. They have so far been focusing on people that are really blatant, not like flying under the radar with a few plants, but in my neck of the woods in Sunny Valley in northern Josephine County, a completely unpapered grow with over 4,000 plants. Very high profile, people driving around in new trucks, flashing cash. Yeah, they took them out. It's something like they declared the value of the bus to be $4 million. So that is exactly what they're looking at right now. There is a growing concern in the law enforcement community that hemp registrations are being used to hide marijuana cultivation, but they also acknowledge that they have no way of dealing with that at this point in time. So right now, the marching orders are keep your papers in order and don't do anything that attracts undue attention to yourself. They have no interest in prosecuting medical patients, and they're still restricted by Oregon's law. If you have a couple of extra plants, all they can do is take those couple of extra plants. The DAs are too busy to prosecute medical patients that have 2 or 3 extra plants. So those charges never actually see a courtroom. But they're going to put those people on a pin map and go back and check. They're not doing much direct enforcement in terms of physical inspections. The primary enforcement mechanism is using the same tools that you have available. If you see that your neighbor has 500 plants on Google Earth and they're supposed to have 6, assume that law enforcement is aware of that as well, and don't do anything to make yourself a target.
Okay. All right. Well, unless either any of you have anything else, I would say that would be. Go ahead, Eviane. Did you have something?
Yeah, I have a quick question for Pete.
You're on mute. Here you go. Hold on. Let me do this. There we go.
Now she's actually on mute. We need to unmute
Okay.
her.
Try it again, there, Eviane.
Am I muted? I'm not muted.
There you go.
We can hear you
There.
now.
Now we can hear you.
Not sure what happened there because I was unmuted and then muted. I had a question for you, Pete. I was wondering if you heard. I heard the water masters in Josephine and Jackson County were really scrutinizing a lot of the hemp grows this season, and I wondered if you had heard anything about that. And just that's my question.
Yeah, that's been an ongoing discussion for a couple of years here. There are some contrarian points of view on this, and we just don't have enough historical evidence to say whether or not hemp cultivation has adversely affected the water table. My take on it, surface water is a lot different than groundwater, and just because one is below or above average does not mean that the other one is. The water masters are also very overburdened. And right now, my higher concern is that Josephine County wants in on another pool of government money. They want to declare the county in a state of drought, even though it's rained 1 out of 3 days for the entire month of June, because they want money for disaster relief. And if they get the disaster declaration for drought, then that means that everybody's water rights will be cut off by the 1st of July. That won't just impact hemp and marijuana farmers, that'll impact everybody. Our water trucking businesses are already at capacity due to the number of OLCC grows that don't have water rights. Hemp farms won't be able to sustain that kind of input unless they have a variety that is acclimated to dryland farming. And most of the type A hemp varieties are not acclimated to dryland farming. They do need some water input. Water masters, as far as individual grow sites go, don't really have the capability to come in and look at an OLCC or hemp farm on a case-by-case basis and try and figure out whether they're using a residential well or not. And of course, our medical growers are exempted from this set of regulations, so we do get to be thankful for that. But yeah, it's going to be an issue. I mean, they called drought and fire season on May 1st this year, and they already said that they're not going to call fire season off until October 31st, no matter what the weather is. If we wind up with a drought declaration, instead of just the newest water rights holders losing their water rights on June 30th, all farming would essentially cease in Josephine County. That's bad for everybody. It's bad for the wine growers. It's bad for the lavender fields, you name it.
Yeah, I've heard.
What can they do about it? Right now, the water masters don't have the resources to pursue anything but the most egregious violations. But if you have a pump in the creek, expect to see a sheriff show up.
Yeah, I've heard similar rumors going around about the TID being shut off earlier this year and different pieces, and actually talked to a few people that work at the TID, and they said that they're going to do their best to keep it on as long as possible. So I'm still hoping that that's accurate for the season.
Well, and TID is Jackson, so they're going to be operating under a different set of rules. If Josephine County pursues drought relief, then it's highly likely that Jackson will also, and so will Klamath for that matter. I believe that Douglas is also in this process right now. Although they don't have OLCC cultivation, they do have medical and hemp cultivation up there. To a large extent, this is a money play by the people that are in charge. And if you don't like the way things are going, there's November 3rd. Other than that, we don't have much recourse. There's certain things that they're more receptive to, but right now, they're not responding to much.
Yeah, meanwhile, the fields were too wet to be tilled for pretty much most of June for a lot of people, just from like the crazy amount of rain that we got. You know, it really did rain like every 3 days, and it was more rain in June. I think that the average was way higher than it has been historically. Definitely,
Oh yeah,
definitely
we
like
had
water in fields.
we had a record or a near total record in June at the time that I departed Oregon. I think we were over 2 inches, and we still had at least 3 more dates forecasted with an expected 1/4 inch of precipitation. So we're going to have a top 10 historically wet June this year.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been unprecedented. You know, it's interesting to see how it's affecting a lot of different things, but I've definitely seen a lot of farmers were slowed down on their, you know, on their fields, but the plants that were already in the ground were really stoked. So I'm, you know, blessed. I'm happy to have the rain. I'll take it.
Always. Yeah. Well, except in like September. We don't want that.
Yeah,
Well, when you look at this climatologically, about 7 out of every 10 years is technically a drought year in Oregon. And that doesn't have to be consecutive. It could be a few years on and 1 year off, a couple years on and a couple years off. It could be a half a dozen in a row. But practically speaking, what's meteorologically defined as drought is actually the norm where we live. And to a large extent, our agricultural practices are actually dependent on that. What Eviane's pointing out with wet weather at the beginning of June, when people would ordinarily expect to be planting, that's an issue because we're not totally dialed in for non-drought years, and the wintertime snowpack notwithstanding, June doesn't really give an indication of 2020 being a drought year in Southern Oregon.
Well, I mean, the fact that we essentially had no rain until June, you know, that's part of it too.
Yeah, for people that got in well before Memorial Day, they're in pretty good shape right now. If people were dragging their feet and they were trying to go in the first week of June, they're probably hating life.
Yeah.
Don't forget
Okay.
I happen to know one person on this call got in time.
there's still a lot of those first week of July planters out there from calculations and a lot of different clients and stuff that we work with. They're still planting. So
Yeah, I drove down. I was driving down 238 today, and there's guys out there in tractors tilling. They were tilling today.
yep, there's
You know.
today.
Well, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, we still have a week until July gets here. Those plants may not be the biggest plants ever, but they should yield and yield well, even going in at this time of year.
Yeah.
And they're, you know, people have them going in greenhouses right now, and they're just waiting for the ground to be dry enough to go outside. They don't get as much of a growth penalty as long as the girls don't get root bound before you put them in the field.
That's the concern, 100%. And what I have noticed as far as pest pressure, to circle back to the very beginning, is that you know, that late June and early July planting, that those pests and the plants sometimes do better, you know, with the pests. They don't get as much infestation as something that we've observed historically. You know, the bigger plants can sometimes, you know, be a little bit harder to manage also. So, you know, all preference.
All right. Well, great. You know, great meeting. Eviane, thank you for coming and sharing all that wonderful information with us. And unless someone else has something else they'd like to share, I suggest we close the meeting. We're almost at 2 hours now. So.
Yeah, I just want to say as a reference, we normally shoot for about 6:15 to 8 o'clock for a standard meeting. We're more or less on track with this one. We're getting used to this platform. We're getting used to this method of communication. We'll be able to keep these meetings up. We'll be able to edit a little bit of this so that our little goofs don't become a nuisance and a distraction from the content. I really appreciate Eviane being willing to participate in this platform. We benefit a lot from your knowledge, and we appreciate your participation with the Guild.
It's a blast working with you guys, and thank you guys. And I wish everybody a good season, and I hope you have fun out there on your adventures in the wild hemp, the new frontier.
There are politicians in every state that require education.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Eviane, for joining us. It's always wonderful to have you on board.
My pleasure.
Okay, everybody, have a good night, and thank you to our attendees. We had at one point we had up to 5, so at least some people were watching. And if you're still watching, we did record this. I made sure that happened when we set it up. So I will put this up on the website in the next week or so. So
That's great.
Hanging out.
right on. Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.